And the reason why we believe that membership should be free is that it's really important for us to ensure that women have the ability to connect. And so when I actually have a professional question, I call a member at EWPN. When I also have something that's maybe not as professional sometimes, but also partly moves into the social aspect, I also call the ladies at EWPN, because we are actually a family. And I probably go through my week and speak to at least 3 different EWPN members as well. So we'd like to make sure that you all know that, and do join us. Join us also on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. We do try to promote a lot of the different things that are happening in the industry. One thing that we'd like to make sure that people understand is that we usually do have a annual event, but because of COVID, we won't be able to hold it this year. Instead, we are holding many more local meetups. We are also holding a lot more programs online with webinars and workshops to cover different topics, everything from topics, as we had mentioned earlier, about supporting women both professionally, as well as women who are going through different times right now, because we are trying to mix together both the professional side and the more familial side, which can be very difficult to do during this time. One of the things that we're very excited about is that we do have some research led by a couple of very accomplished ladies, Annette and Erin, who will share about the Fintech ecosystem, which will help you also understand why it's so critical for us to be involved in this area. So let me turn it over back to Meirav.
Thank you, Regina. And it's interesting because one point that I think all of our guests here can enjoy is actually having the network, and we all know how important networks are, and here's the opportunity actually to connect to a network of women that are working in fintech payments and all the rest of these subjects. And some of them are very professional and very high levels and have a lot of knowledge, and the ability to talk to colleagues and understand and learn more is something that's very important, and we, as we all know. And here's an opportunity actually to expand our network into these professional women all over Europe and also beyond Europe. So thank you very much, Regina. And I think that now we can move on to a very interesting topic that kind of we spoke about, whoever was here a little bit before everybody went on mute. We were talking about how COVID-19 is actually kind of taking things backwards, and especially if we're looking at women, it can affect. Now, this is something that's just on top of what's happening with I'd say the difference between women and men professionally and women and men financially. And this is a point that's very interesting, and we're seeing more and more people touch upon this. The issue of, do we need to have specifically made or tailor-made products, financial products, for different segments of people, women, for example. And through EWPN, Dr. Erin Taylor and Annette, they did a research, and if you ladies would like to open up your microphones, hopefully this is going to work now, and share your presentation, we'd really appreciate that.
Great, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Meirav, and thanks for the opportunity. It's very nice to speak with you all today. I'm going to talk a bit about this report that Annette and I produced, and which has been just very recently launched. I will give more of the background, and then Annette will present more on the results. So just to start with, Annette and I both have quite a long history of working in financial services in one way or the other. I personally, I'm an anthropologist by training. I have a PhD in anthropology from the University of Sydney, and I worked as an academic on issues relating to financial behaviour for a very long time before I began working as a research consultant. So I've done research on topics like the use of mobile money in Haiti, payments in the Netherlands, and financial inclusion in East Africa. Now, throughout all these projects that I've done, women's issues always arose. You know, when you're talking about mobile money in Haiti, you can't help but notice how women might use it differently than men, for example. But I never really looked seriously into gender until I became involved with the EWPN. Annette and I, very early on, a couple of years ago, decided that actually more research needs to be done within the EWPN, and we need to bring more light to what research has already been done in not only the role of women in the financial services industry and how they experience it, but also on financial services for women. And so this is where we get to the beginning of this report. So how this project actually developed was serendipitously, last year I was approached to write a book chapter on the topic of women in financial services, of which, of course, I said yes, although I hadn't written specifically about gender before. I had kind of had that interest to do it for some time. And of course, you know, I approached Annette to write it with me, because who doesn't want a brilliant research partner as a co-author? So we wrote this book chapter, which also just came out a couple of months ago. And in that book chapter, we start to explore this question of why would you need financial service for women, and what does the market look like? And we discovered a few different kinds of ways that companies are approaching women. And we wrote about those in the chapter. But once we finished it, we realized that we really had only scratched the surface. We didn't have a clear idea how many services are out there for women, what kinds of services they are, and what kinds of trends have actually developed, like how are companies trying to reach the female market. And so we went on to write the report, which we're talking about today. Now, we had a few different research questions we were interested in putting this together. The first question, of course, is, do women really need their own financial services? After all, something like cash or any kind of payments means is not gendered. Like, the whole purpose is that it's neutral, and so you can use cash to pay for anything, or a card to pay for anything, without it being specifically a gendered product. The second thing is that women are a very diverse group of people. You know, what does it mean to produce services for women when you have so many differences in age, income, social class, country of origin, ethnicity, etc.? How can you possibly design services for such a broad group? And then the third and one of the most interesting questions is, how are companies beginning to address the female market, or how have they done so? Because there are quite a lot of different potential approaches that can be taken. So, for example, in the middle picture on this slide, we have a master charge ad from the 1970s that shows a woman who is very professionally dressed, very kind of smart and savvy looking. And the slogan says, "I carry clout." So that's trying to appeal to women who want to be taken seriously in society, which is probably not a bad pitch to make in the 1970s. And then you have the other approach, which is the whole pink it and shrink it idea, which is you can take something, make it pink, make it smaller, and then it will appeal to women because that's what women like, which sometimes can be a great approach and actually works, sometimes not, as well, we sort of go into in the report. So then the method we used to go about this research was, first we had a good look at the literature that is available about women's financial behaviour, which Annette will talk about in a minute, so I won't go on to that. And we set out to identify as many financial services as we possibly could around the world. We looked at different kinds, so services designed exclusively for women. So things like Elvest or Sheila's Wheels are really meant just for female consumption, although of course men can choose to use them as well. They're not excluded from using them. There are services designed with women's needs in mind, and this means services that could actually be for everybody, but women's needs have been particularly considered. And this is important because there has been quite a history of product design in which women were not thought of, and you end up with things like airbags that when they inflate are perfect for tall men, but might end up in the wrong place with women and not actually protect them from an accident. So it's the same with financial services. If you don't think about women, then you could actually end up having problems in your design. We also looked at services that are used extensively by women, but actually may not have been designed for women at all. And one of the greatest examples of this is Afterpay, which is a service that exists in Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And Afterpay's founder says that he actually invented the product for millennials to help them cope with financial instability. But if you look at the market, most of the customers are really women. And their use of Afterpay follows on from a long history of using lay-by or layaway services as part of the shopping they do for their families. And then, of course, you have services designed by women, and these may or may not be designed for women. So you might have services that actually has a female designer, and especially they were going after the female market. Or you also have services designed by women, but which don't try to go after the female market at all. So we mapped all these out. We came up with a whole long list of companies, which you can see in both the infographic and the company directory. And then we tried to identify what were the pain points these services were trying to address. And we tried to analyze whether these solutions mapped out on the research that had been done on female behavior, and whether there was some sort of whether they kind of got it right in a sense, maybe not so judgmental, but, what were they addressing that we'd actually seen in the research. And Annette, I can hand over to you now.
Well, let me start by saying perhaps that my name is Meirav Harel. I am an economist by training, and I did my PhD on collaborative innovation. So strategy and innovation has been my field for a long time. And I actually worked for many years in banking, working with different kinds of, so now I can share my screen, I think. There you go. Sorry for interrupting. Now you can see the presentation again. I'll just go up one slide if I can. Well, never mind. I'm so sorry for this technology problem. I keep...
It's okay. After my technology problems, anything will look smaller. So it's, don't worry about it at all.
There you go. That was where we were. So my background is in economy, and I did my PhD on collaborative innovation, and I worked for many years in banking. I also helped start the Fintech Startup Hub in Copenhagen some years ago. So I have worked in the sector for many years, and I really never considered that we would need to discuss women's issues. Just like Erin, I thought that this problem would sort of go away over time. And when I was contacted by EWPN to take part in the annual conference some years ago, I realized that this was still not the case. And I thought, well, something has to be done about it. And this is where we come back to the slide, because we started looking to what kind of existing knowledge is in place. And of course, it's not so that nothing has been done on this subject of professional services targeted directly at women. Something has been done, but it's scattered in many academic fields and in many kinds of industry and organizational reports. And so the trouble is perhaps that it's not systematic, it's not very easy to find, and not conclusive in any way. So we really felt that we started uncovering a new area of studies. See if I can get to the next one. And then what did we find? Well, I should start by something that's not on this slide, perhaps saying that we found that many of the companies in this area are quite young. Many of them started within the last 5 years. And many are actually started by women with a very professionally strong background in traditional services. And Elvest is a good example of that. Sally Crawford explains in many interviews how she was looking in the mirror and realizing one day that most of the services that she was provided were made and developed by men and targeted exclusively at men over 50. So that really needed to be changed. And so we come back to the question that I have been asking continuously through the last month or so since we published this report and the book chapter, and that is the fact of, is it really so that women would need different products? Isn't that just stupid? I mean, financial services are really very gender neutral, and it's just a question of women learning to manage their financial affairs, isn't it? And when we looked at the product offered, we found that the communication of the services and the product was quite different to what is traditionally the case in finance. And I can say that feeling very confident because I've been in the sector for so many years that I have myself worked with new products, new product development and marketing. So I know what I'm talking about. And often you will offer a product and say, this is new technology, this is very secure, this will offer you a great return. How much money do you want to invest and for how long a time? And what is your expectation on profits? This is not where the products that we looked at start. They start with, what is your life situation? Are you a young professional? Do you do a great job? How much money do you think you will need in the following years? When do you expect to retire? Are you currently a single parent needing to set up an emergency fund, etc., etc.? So these products seem to start from a quite different angle. This anchored in the context of the people using the financial services. So that's one thing that we found. Another thing that was definitely an issue is that value is very much in focus. So it's a question of what kind of services do you need to provide you with value from your financial services? What makes it easy for you? What provides you with a good overview of your economy and your spending and your loyalty points and your possibilities to choose the best and the cheapest way of paying, for instance. So very anchored in everyday reality. Also, we found that across different cultures, across different areas, there's a great consideration of impact. So this impact could be on sustainability, on climate, or on inclusion, or even on supporting your local community. And I think that we cite Barbara Stewart, who's just recommended a new report this morning I saw on LinkedIn, and has been working in investment for many years. And she's done great work over the last 10 years, showing that women consider risk and investment in a broader perspective, perhaps, than many men, in the sense that they focus on not on direct returns or whether to choose best stocks or bonds or startups to finance, but rather the fact of how can I best invest to ensure the lifestyle that I want over the next years. And actually, that is what any financial advisor would want to ask you as a customer if you actually talk to them. So again, a different and broader perspective. And we found that the fact of being part of a trusted community is quite important to many women. And so many of these offers and many of these solutions provided come with the community. So there's a possibility of participating in events like these, in webinars, in physical meetups, or to just contact some of the other partners and ask them, what is your situation? What are your thoughts on this kind of finance and these problems? And also, it seems that many women would like to learn. Is this a question of women being unaccustomed to work with finance? I think not. We find that a very large part of household decision and investment decision in families are taken by women. So it's not a question of lacking knowledge, but perhaps of recognizing that of dealing with insecurity and possibilities in life is something that it's sometimes good to discuss with others and to learn more about. So the offer of information, of blogs, of podcasts, and even of specific academies is important in this field. So there's definitely a way of promoting new solutions and promoting products in a different way to anchor them well with this kind of customers. And I couldn't tell you whether this is exclusively a women's case, or if this is just a case that when you start asking your customers what they want, they will answer something that's different from what many banks at least have been doing, like looking from the inside out, saying this is a great new technology, we'll provide you with this fabulous product that you will certainly need to use. Whereas if you went to ask the customers what their pain points, their situation were, they might ask differently. So perhaps this is the new services that both men and women will want in the future. I don't know, but for now, we certainly see that this is targeted directly at women. I was going to give you a good example in the I Fund Women but I think that in the light of time and in the light of allowing you to ask questions, I will skip the case and make instead 3 small points, I think. One is that when you look to funding of entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, which I think in Israel is very relevant because you have a great entrepreneurial background and situation, I know, then definitely it's the case that 25 to 30% of entrepreneurs are women, but they don't get more than 2 to 3% of perhaps VC capital, and even angel investors are difficult to find. So this is an area to move forward in. Also, the example that I chose here was the I Fund Women, which is quite interesting because it's crowdfunding, and it appears through different reports that actually women are better more successful at raising money through their crowdfunding, which is quite interesting for future capital funding, I think, in this area. And I think the last point I'd like to make is in a little different area, actually the area of investing and learning to invest, because Erin mentioned earlier the investment club Voleo, which is a mobile investment club providing services where you can sign up with your own community, your friends, your family, or a new crowd to learn how to invest and to compare your performance with other investor clubs, and has a 40% rate of women customers, although it's not specifically targeted at women. And I think that this compared to one of the Israeli companies that we found, which is Naomi, which is also a community, but more of a physical community where people sign up together to learn and to invest. So definitely the fact of working in a community is something that's important for women. And we found a number of companies, and we draw up this ecosystem for women. And we'd very much love to keep this moving forward, to add more companies as we move on. And so any input that you'd like to send to us or comment on today, or send through LinkedIn or whenever, or through mail at a later point, please do, because we'd love to learn. I know for a fact, and when I think of the contacts that I've had previously with Israel, it's been very much also about security and RegTech, and we didn't even provide a section on RegTech because we were very focused on everyday consumer life. So that's an area where we could definitely move on. Also, I've heard from some of the women in the last group that Erin mentioned, the women-based communities and services offered, like Limitless, for instance, which is not targeted at women, but developed by a woman founder. And certainly we could do better covering these, I think. So it would be really great to hear your comments and your suggestions to move this forward. And while we are at the idea of moving forward, I think I'd like to end on this topic that let's do more research. Let's find out if this is a question of women needing specific products, or whether this is a case of getting to understand financial customers much better in the future, be they millennials or Generation Z or whoever. So definitely we'd like to keep building the female finance ecosystem, like I mentioned. We'd also very much like to do more empirical research with women in different contexts to understand the cultural differences. It could also be religious differences. I think we were asked at some point, why don't you do something on Islamic finance? And that is a subject that I actually worked with many, many years ago, and a large subject is that, and possibly one with a gendered angle as well. And doing more comparative studies with industry would be great. And I would perhaps let Erin have the last word on this, because this is very much a question, I think, of making existing incumbent companies and even new financial startups and fintech startups work more directly with their customers to understand what customer needs are for now and for the future. And there are ways of learning that. And I think Canela Consulting's Toolkit is a great way of working with it, and one that might be very interesting to take up with industry in the future.
Thank you, Annette. Yes, just very quickly, I'm happy to say that last week my company, Canella Consulting, published another publication called the Consumer Finance Research Methods Toolkit, which is a toolkit of how different researchers in academia and industry are innovating with research methods to find new ways to understand about consumer financial behaviour. So this is an interdisciplinary toolkit, and that matters for gender research because we feel that doing gender research or any group on a particular population does require a mixed methods approach, not sticking to data or not just sticking to qualitative, but thinking through the research problem for new ways to find out information. But I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to send more information if you'd like to know more.
Thank you, Annette and Aaron. We do have time for one or two questions from our audience regarding female finance. If anyone, does anyone have a specific question that they'd like to ask? Okay, I'm gonna ask, okay? Have you checked how many of, I'd say, let's say products that have been made with females in mind and follow the rules of what you saw that, and what you said that we see? Have we seen that there's, I'd say, higher usage amongst women and women that are actually starting to use these tools and getting more into the different aspects of finance due to having these specific tools?
Well, if I understand correctly, you're asking about if can we document the usage, and that's actually another
Does this work? The question is, does this work?
And this is a great question because we set out trying to collect data on the different companies, and we tried to find the number of customers and the part of women customers as part of this. And most of these companies are quite young and they don't offer their customer numbers yet. So it's a very good question. That should be followed up, definitely.
All right. All right. Okay, so first of all, thank you both very much for sharing your research with us. I'm going to be, do we have any other questions? And if not, we're going to be moving on to our panel. All right, okay, so if we have additional questions, we have how to contact Aaron and Annette, and let's move on to our next subject. And we actually we wanted to speak about two very interesting topics that are kind of on the front page with fintech, and one of them is central bank digital currencies, which we're seeing popping up around the world right now. And the second one of them that is relevant to a lot of us is the issue of open banking. But because we're kind of short on time, what I'm thinking is that we're going to start with one of these topics, and then we can go a little bit over time if people want to stay, and we can talk about the second subject. I think we're going to start with central bank digital currencies. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Estelle Brack from France, and we have Nelixa from London, and we have Jag, if you have your microphone okay. And do you ladies want to turn your microphones on? All right. Hi, Estelle. Hi, Nelixa. How are you guys doing?
Hi there. Morning.
Hi, good morning to you. So we're going to be talking a little bit about central bank digital currencies, and I think we're going to start with a question to Nelixa. We're seeing more and more jurisdictions looking at this, and why is this happening? What's driving this?
Thank you. Yes, thanks very much for the invitation to come and discuss this topic today. And my apologies now, but I do have a hard stop at 10 o'clock. Okay. But just to pick up on your question, I think it might be useful just if we touch upon the fact that central bank digital currencies are not cryptocurrencies. This is money that is issued and backed by your local central bank. It's the same, has the same equivalence as the notes and coins that you carry in your pocket, but it's different from the electronic money that we, use today when I send money from my bank account to your bank account, because that money is a bank deposit. And that's backed by its commercial bank money, which is backed by deposit guarantee schemes. whereas central bank digital currency would be a digital representation of the notes and coins that you carry, and therefore have the central bank backing. And I think it's worth saying that central banks have been looking at this topic for a very long time. There are lots and lots of publications out there from central banks across the globe, Sweden, Canada, Bank of England, Singapore, and many others. And they've been looking at it for many reasons, many different policy drivers, you know, financial inclusion, better payment systems, faster payments, competition innovation, traceability, law enforcement, and of course, last year, very much accelerated by the reaction to the Libra white paper. And I think that that has driven and accelerated the interest of central banks in digital currencies. And I think that we are, in the next few years, actually going to see a mainstream adoption. When I say next few years, probably, you know, about 5. It's not like next year.
You think it's going to take 5 years for
I
us
think
to
at
see
least
many
5
countries?
years. At least 5 years. I mean, there are pilots ongoing. There's a pilot in the Bahamas called the Sand Dollar Project. There's obviously a pilot being undertaken by the People's Bank of China for a digital yuan.
Which I understood that they already started distributing in different cities.
Yes, I think it's in about 3 cities at the moment. The Swedish Riksbank, which was at the forefront of all of this, is undertaking work on looking at, you know, rolling out a retail CBDC. Whereas interesting, the Banque de France and other central banks have been looking more in the wholesale CBDC space.
Yeah, so this is a question for Estelle. And could you tell us, well, first of all, I have a few questions for you. First of all, could you please tell us what the difference is between wholesale and retail CBDCs? We'd like to know that. And also if you could, you know, tell us what you think about the digital yuan and the global dollar and all the rest of, you know, what's happening there.
Yeah, thank you, Meirav. Yeah, I think it's to add to very interesting Nilisha, the description of CBDC, we have to distinguish between retail and wholesale. And the first one is the one intended to be distributed and available for the whole population, like cards and card payment we use nowadays. And the second one, wholesale, is dedicated to banks. So it's more on the interbanking space between the central banks and the banks. And this is the wholesale is the one Banque de France is focusing on, and also what we think, or what we know that the European Central Bank is more focusing on, because that would be very interesting for banks for cross-border payments, interbanking cross-border payments. In the European area, the largest zone, but also in other countries. And we have a new platform in the Arab Monetary Fund that has been implemented recently, that is focusing on wholesale. So, and retail, my analysis is that retail CBDC are less needed in Europe, except Sweden or that kind of countries, but they are less needed in Europe, where we have already all kinds of digital payment instruments, than in unbanked countries such as Africa, but also South America. And